I was standing in the middle of my father-in-law's hospital room, holding a pen over a piece of paper. I never imagined I'd have to sign when my sister-in-law walked through the door and said 4 words that unraveled 2 years of lies in about 30 seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Stella. I'm 31 years old, and until 18 months ago, I was what most people would call lucky. I had a husband I adored, a house we'd picked out together, a dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of our bed, and a life that felt solid in the way you don't fully appreciate until it starts cracking underneath you. My husband's name is Kevin. We met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's cookout in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was the kind of man who remembered small things. The way I liked my coffee, the name of my childhood best friend, the specific brand of crackers I always reached for at the grocery store. We got married after 3 years of dating in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Asheville. It rained that morning and cleared up by noon. We always said it was a sign. For the first 4 years, I had no reason to doubt anything. Then his father got sick. My father-in-law, I always called him Dad, because he insisted, because he said I was family the moment Kevin brought me home, was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 18 months ago. He was 67. He'd been a contractor his whole life, built half the custom homes in his county, had hands that looked like they'd been through a war. Watching those hands start to shake was one of the hardest things I'd ever seen, and watching Kevin watch it was even harder. Dad had built a small construction company over 40 years. Nothing huge, maybe 20 employees at its peak, but it was his legacy. He'd planned to pass it to Kevin eventually. When the diagnosis came, that timeline moved up fast. Kevin started spending more time at the office. Then more evenings. Then weekends. He said it was the transition, the paperwork, learning the accounts, managing contracts his father had always handled personally. I believed him. Of course I believed him. But around month 3, something shifted. The man who used to send me a thinking of you text at 2 in the afternoon stopped reaching out at all unless I messaged first. The man who used to come to bed talking about our future. The trip to Portugal we kept planning and never booking. The possibility of kids, whether we'd stay in Charlotte or find somewhere quieter, went quiet. Not just about the future, about everything. I told myself it was grief. Not the kind where someone is already gone, but the anticipatory kind. The kind where you watch someone you love slowly become less of who they were. I tried to give him space. I tried to be present without being suffocating. I made dinners. I left him alone when he clearly needed it. I told myself this was what marriage looked like sometimes. One person carrying the other through a hard season, and then eventually trading places. But the silence stretched. One night, I woke up at 2 in the morning, and Kevin wasn't in bed. I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with his phone face down in front of him. When I turned on the light, he startled like I'd caught him doing something. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Come back to bed," I said. He did. But he lay with his back to me, and I lay there staring at the ceiling for an hour, telling myself I was overreacting. I wasn't. A few weeks later, I found a credit card statement I hadn't seen before. Not a secret account, just a card I didn't know we had, tucked into a drawer in his home office when I was looking for a stapler. The balance wasn't alarming, but the purchases were strange. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, a few cash withdrawals, things that didn't match any conversation we'd had. When I asked him about it, he said it was for the business. Transition costs. Stuff he was handling for his dad. He said it in the same tone he'd been using for months, calm, a little flat, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. I told him I wanted to understand the finances better. He said he'd explain everything when things settled down. Things never settled down. I started to wonder if there was someone else. I hated myself for thinking it, but I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't come. I checked what I could check. I found nothing. No second phone. No strange receipts from restaurants we'd never been to together. No emotional distance that felt like guilt. It felt more like he was somewhere else entirely, even when he was sitting right next to me. I had no idea what I was actually dealing with. Dad's condition progressed faster than the doctors had initially projected. By month 8 of the diagnosis, he needed help at home. Kevin hired a part-time aide. His sister, I'll call her Joanna, she's 3 years younger than Kevin and sharp in the way that makes some people uncomfortable, flew in from Denver to help coordinate care. Joanna and I had always gotten along. She was direct. She said what she thought. I respected that about her even when it made me nervous. When Joanna arrived, she took one look at me and said, "You look exhausted." I told her I was fine. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. The next few months were hard in a different way. Dad was declining, and the house felt like it was holding its breath. Kevin became even more withdrawn. He started sleeping on the couch some nights, claiming he didn't want to wake me when he came in late. I stopped arguing about it. I didn't have the energy. Then, on a Wednesday morning in February, Kevin sat down across from me at the breakfast table and told me he thought we should separate. I remember the exact quality of the light in that kitchen. Gray. Winter light through the window over the sink. I remember the coffee going cold in my mug while he talked. He didn't say he wanted a divorce. Not right away. He said separation. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he needed space to figure some things out. He said he was sorry, but he said it the way you apologize for bumping into someone in a hallway. Like it cost him nothing. I asked him if there was someone else. He said no. I asked him if he still loved me. He didn't answer immediately, and that pause did more damage than any word could have. He moved into the spare room that night. His mother, who I had barely seen during any of this, called me the following week. She was pleasant on the phone. Almost too pleasant. She said she knew this was hard, and that she hoped I understood that Kevin was under enormous pressure with his father's illness and the business, and that sometimes people needed room to breathe. She said she was sure it would all work itself out. I hung up the phone feeling worse than before I answered it. Over the next 6 weeks, separation became, we should probably make this official. Kevin got a lawyer. I got a lawyer. Paperwork began moving back and forth, slow and grinding, like machinery that had rusted and was being forced to turn anyway. Dad was still alive through all of this. Still in the house. Still shaking and getting quieter week by week. I visited him twice during that period, when Kevin wasn't there. He held my hand both times without saying much. On the second visit, he looked at me for a long time and said, "I'm sorry, Stella. I'm sorry about all of it." I thought he meant the situation, the illness, the stress on the family. I didn't realize he was apologizing for something specific. The day everything changed was a Thursday. Dad had been admitted to the hospital 2 days earlier. A fall, nothing broken, but his care team wanted to monitor him and adjust his medications. Kevin and I were both there, which meant we were in the same room for the first time in weeks without a lawyer or a mediator between us. We barely spoke. We sat on opposite sides of Dad's bed and watched the monitors and didn't look at each other. A hospital social worker had requested that we sign a healthcare proxy document, a formality related to Dad's treatment plan going forward, clarifying who could make decisions on his behalf if he became unable to. Kevin was the primary, which made sense. But there was a secondary form as well, related to financial authorization for medical costs, and Kevin had asked me to sign it. His lawyer had agreed it was appropriate given we were still legally married. So there I was, standing at the bedside table with a pen, my father-in-law in the bed in front of me, my soon-to-be ex-husband sitting 3 feet away looking at his phone. I looked at the form. I looked at Dad. Dad was asleep. I picked up the pen, and then the door opened. Joanna walked in. She'd driven from the airport directly to the hospital. Her coat was still on. She had a bag over one shoulder and a large manila envelope in her hand, and when she looked at me standing there with the pen, she said, "Stella, don't sign that." The room went very still. Kevin stood up. "Joanna, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." She set her bag down on the chair by the door and walked toward me. She wasn't angry. She was the opposite of angry. Calm in the way people get calm when they've made a decision they've been building up to for a long time. She put her hand over mine, gently, and took the pen out of my fingers. Then she looked at her brother. "Tell her," she said, "or I will." Kevin's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I have copies of the accounts," she said. She held up the envelope, all of them, including the ones Mom doesn't know I found. I looked at Kevin. His face had gone the color of old concrete. Joanna turned to me and said the sentence that rebuilt my entire understanding of the last 8 months. "His mother has been draining Dad's business accounts for years. Kevin found out 14 months ago, and instead of telling you, he decided to protect her." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It came out in pieces after that. Joanna laid the documents on the bedside table, one by one, like she'd been preparing for exactly this moment, because she had. She'd spent the last 3 months going through records, after noticing inconsistencies in the business accounts, when she was helping set up a financial power of attorney for Dad's medical care. What she found was substantial. Kevin's mother had been making unauthorized withdrawals from the business's operating accounts for at least 4 years. Small amounts at first. A few $100s here, 1,000 there, routed through a separate LLC she'd created using her maiden name. But over time, the amounts grew. By the time Kevin noticed something was wrong, the total had reached somewhere close to $180,000. Kevin confronted her privately. She admitted it. She told him she'd borrowed money years ago from her own family to help fund the business in the early days. Money she'd never been formally repaid, and that she'd been quietly recouping what she felt she was owed. Whether or not that was true, she had done it without anyone's knowledge, without documentation, and in a way that had been slowly compromising the financial health of a business his father had spent his life building. Kevin hired a private accountant. He began working with a business attorney. He told no one. Not his father, not Joanna, and not me. He said he was trying to resolve it quietly before it became something that destroyed the family. But it kept getting worse. His mother kept insisting that if it went public, the fallout would be devastating. Not just for her, but for the business, for Dad's care, for the family's reputation in a community where they'd lived for decades. And then, and this is the part that took my breath away when Joanna explained it. His mother told Kevin that I would eventually find out, and that when I did, I might go to the authorities or push for legal action. She told him the safest thing, for everyone, was to remove me from the equation before the situation became public. She didn't frame it as cruel. She framed it as practical. She told her son that separating from me would protect him legally, protect her, and protect Dad's estate from any claims or complications. She told him I'd be fine, that I was young, that I'd move on, and my husband, the man who remembered the brand of crackers I liked, the man who danced with me in the rain at our own wedding, he believed her. He went along with it, not because he didn't love me, but because he was scared and ashamed and completely under a pressure I had no idea existed. Joanna hadn't known any of this until 3 months ago. When she started connecting the dots, she called Kevin and gave him a deadline. "Tell Stella yourself, or I'm telling her." He kept stalling. She stopped waiting. Kevin hadn't said a word during Joanna's explanation. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the sound of the hospital monitor beside Dad's bed. I looked at Kevin for a long time. Then I looked at Joanna. Then I looked down at the form I'd almost signed. The financial authorization document that, according to Joanna's attorney, would have given Kevin's mother indirect access to certain medical cost reimbursements, tied to the business accounts. I hadn't known that. Kevin might not have known that either, or maybe he did. I still don't know for certain. I set the form down on the table unsigned. "Kevin," I said. He looked up. "Why didn't you just tell me?" His eyes were wet. He blinked once, slowly. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "Because I thought if you knew what my family had done, and what I had let happen, you would leave. And I thought, I believed her when she said it would be simpler if we just..." He stopped. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. "I thought I was protecting you from something that wasn't your mess to deal with." It became my mess, I said. The moment you asked me to sign divorce papers, it became my mess. He nodded. He didn't try to argue with that. After Kevin and I left the hospital that afternoon, we sat in the parking garage in separate cars for a while, both parked near the elevator, neither of us pulling out. Eventually, he walked over and knocked on my passenger window. I unlocked it. He got in. We sat there for maybe 40 minutes without the engine on, talking in a way we hadn't talked in a year and a half. He told me everything. The timeline, the confrontations with his mother, the accountant, the attorney, the weight of it, the way it had metastasized into something so large. He couldn't figure out how to say it out loud. He didn't make excuses. That surprised me. He said he'd made choices he couldn't undo, and that the least he could do now was stop making them. I told him I was furious. He said I had every right to be. I told him I didn't know if I could come back from it. He said he understood. What happened next wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't a hug in the parking garage and suddenly everything was okay. Life doesn't work like that, and anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't been through anything real. What happened was slower than that, and harder. We withdrew the separation paperwork, at least temporarily, at my lawyer's suggestion, not because I was certain I wanted to stay married, but because I wasn't certain I wanted to end it. And those are two different things that deserve space between them. I needed time to decide from a place of clarity rather than from the middle of a crisis. I hadn't even understood until 48 hours ago. Kevin's mother was formally confronted by Kevin and Joanna together, in the presence of the family's business attorney. She denied some of it, minimized the rest, and cried in a way that felt more like strategy than grief. The attorney made clear that the money would need to be repaid, and that the alternative was a formal legal process that would be a great deal worse for everyone, particularly her. She eventually agreed to a repayment plan. It was not a satisfying ending. There was no dramatic collapse of her pretense, no moment where she looked at me and admitted she'd tried to dismantle my marriage to cover her own tracks. She just sat there looking diminished, and then she signed the paperwork, and that was that. Dad recovered from the fall. He's still declining. That part didn't change, and it won't, but he's home, and he's comfortable, and he has people around him. He found out about the money eventually. Kevin told him gently during one of their evening visits. Dad was quiet for a long time after. Then he said he'd suspected something was off for years, but hadn't let himself look too closely. He said that was on him as much as anyone. He said he was glad Kevin had people around him who cared enough to tell the truth. Joanna went back to Denver about a month after everything came out. Before she left, she and I sat on my back porch with a bottle of wine and talked for 3 hours. At one point, she said, "I know he hurt you. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm just asking you to know that the Kevin who shut you out isn't the only Kevin that exists." I've thought about that a lot. We've been in couples counseling since March. My individual therapist says I'm processing at a healthy pace, which is the kind of sentence that sounds like nothing and means everything when you've been living in confusion for over a year. Kevin and I don't have the same marriage we had before. I don't think we ever will. Something broke that doesn't fully mend, even when you choose to stay. But we're choosing to stay. Not because it's easy, not because everything is resolved. We're choosing to stay because when I look at the man across the dinner table, I can see two things at once. The person who failed me in a way that cost me a year of my life and a year of our marriage, and the person who, underneath all that failure, never actually stopped loving me. He just let fear speak louder than love for too long. I'm not interested in pretending that's a small thing to forgive. It isn't. I'm also not interested in pretending the good years didn't happen, or that the man I married was a fiction. There's a version of this story where I signed those papers, where I walked out of that hospital room a few minutes earlier before Joanna arrived, where I spent the next year believing my marriage had simply failed, that something in us had quietly broken down, that Kevin had fallen out of love with me, and hadn't had the courage to say so clearly. I would have built a whole understanding of my life around a lie. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. Not what happened, but how close I came to never knowing. Joanna texted me last week. She sent a photo, her and Dad at a family dinner over the holidays, him in his chair with his hands wrapped around a mug of something warm, smiling. She wrote underneath it, "He asked about you. I told him you were good," he said. "She's a tough one." He meant it as a compliment. I saved that photo. And I think about what it means to be tough. Not in the way that means you don't break, but in the way that means you're still standing after the breaking. Still asking questions. Still refusing to sign something until you understand exactly what it is you're agreeing to. That's what I think toughness actually looks like, in the end. Not the absence of damage. Just the insistence on the truth, even when the truth arrives late, and through a door you weren't expecting. In the hands of someone you almost didn't have time to thank.